This is great. Good afternoon and welcome to the California Climate Change Exchange Kickoff event. Thank you. I'm just a small part of this large program. My name is Gina Garcia, and I am a member of the California Climate Exchange. But in my day job, I am the Residential and Community Greening Program Director at Sustainable Works. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, Sustainable Works is a Santa Monica-based environmental nonprofit whose focus is education, and we get a large percentage of our funding from the city of Santa Monica. I love what I do, but to be perfectly honest, sometimes it can be a little bit depressing. And those of you who've been involved in this for a while know what I mean. I need to stay up to date on the latest environmental news, and I'm constantly inundated with information. And to be frank, there's a lot of not good stuff going on. Colony collapse disorder where bees are dying, ocean acidification, plastics in our ocean, rainforests being destroyed for palm oil. And I sometimes wonder if what I'm doing makes a difference, if what we're doing makes a difference. And my honest answer to you is yes, it does. I will teach my workshops and I will be wondering if I'm making an impact. And then time and time again, people come to me and say, oh my God, I learned so much that I didn't know before. And I'm taking the solutions that you've shown me and I'm implementing them in my life. And not only in their personal lives, but they're taking that information and they're sharing it with others. And they're going out in their community, and that's what it's all about. And so when I hear that, it gives me a lot of hope. And when I see all of you in this room, it gives me even more hope. And I'm looking around and I see people that have been involved in sustainability for a very long time that are here yet again at another event, coming to learn more and to stay connected and do what they can do. And I'm sure there's people in the audience who are here for their first time and they're wanting to get connected. And I commend all of you. You guys applauded for me. I need you to applaud for yourselves. You're coming out again on a Sunday. On a Sunday afternoon when there's so many other things that you could be doing. Last week I met with the sustainability director at Red Bull, you know, the energy drink. They're interested in bringing our employee education program, the Lunch and Learn, to their offices, and I was talking with her, and she was very excited about what we were doing. And she said, basically what she's learned from talking to everyone at work is that people basically really want to do the right thing, but they don't always know what the right thing is, or they don't always know how to get connected. And that's what we're all about. We're here to connect with each other and create a movement, because together we really can change things. We've heard this before, change doesn't come from the top, and did we need any more evidence in the past month of our extremely dysfunctional federal government? Change comes from the bottom. And we together, with people who care, across the city, across this country, and across this globe, we will be, and we are, the change we want to see in the world. So thank you once again for coming to this great event. So what is the California Climate Change Exchange? It's a new organization designed to fill a need, a real need in the climate change movement, mutual aid. The value of what we're doing this afternoon is not just acknowledging climate change and learning what people are doing about it and thanking them, but it's creating a community-based, multifaceted strategy in the struggle against it. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest. It's Mr. William Selby, and I've had the honor of knowing Bill for quite a few years. He's one of Sustainable Works' strongest supporters. Whenever Sustainable Works would have an event, Bill was the first one to sign up. Whenever Sustainable Works had a fundraiser, Bill was the first one to pull out his checkbook or his credit card. And I really must say, Bill Selby is one of the nicest people that I know. He has been teaching climate, weather, and environmental studies in the Earth Science Department at Santa Monica College since the 1980s. And the majority of his studies work focuses on in-the-field studies. I hear he takes his students on amazing field trips. I hope to one day join you on one of those trips. This year, Bill unveiled a major update and third edition of his book, Rediscovering the Golden State, California Geography. Bill has also served as a leader for the Center for Environmental and Urban Studies at Santa Monica College. He's on the advisory board of Sustainable Works, and he is also on the board of the Santa Monica Task Force for the Environment. I give you Mr. William Selby. Oh.
Wow, this is amazing. You know, I'm a little overwhelmed because when I look out in this audience, I see people that for many years I've admired, people I've looked up to in this community. These are the people who have made this community the great place that it is, and that's what makes me overwhelmed. I'm a little bit more nervous than I thought I would be, Gina. So if I make a lot of mistakes, I hope you understand. I do want to say, though, that Gina and the Sustainable Works folks, I've always said I was one of your biggest fans, and the reason for that is I think you've done more to make Santa Monica and the West Side sustainable than any organization, group, event that I know of. It's really remarkable what Sustainable Works has done.
And I have to counter that Sustainable Works wouldn't exist if it wasn't for people like Bill Selby.
Oh, I heard a voice. I didn't know it was yours. Yes, thank you. Wow, I thought this is really a church and we're being, whoa. Hey, I went ahead already. What? I guess I'm already nervous. Okay, there we go. So you want to, is my time up yet, Valerie? No? Okay. What I'm trying to show you here is the ozone hole, and most of you, oh, you know what? I was going to introduce all of this, and so what I'd like to do is have people leave their politics at the door just for a few minutes, because we're going to talk about scientific data. We're going to talk about objective scientific data. We're going to talk about facts, and I only have 14 minutes to do it. And so we start with the ozone hole. Be careful with this. I've heard it over and over again. This is not the global warming CO2 problem. This is a different problem with different solutions. And the good news is that scientists many decades ago figured out what the problem was with the ozone in the stratosphere. That's above the troposphere, okay? I'm still playing with it. There it goes. Anyway, where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so here's the great news. As scientists figured out what the problem is, we know what was destroying ozone in the stratosphere. We know this is a life and death situation. It's not about whether we're going to be a couple of degrees warmer next year or not. It's whether you can walk out in the sun or we can grow food. Literally, all right? And so scientists figured out what the problem was, that CFCs and the chlorine that comes from them was one of the culprits in decreasing the amount of ozone in our stratosphere. Nitrogen oxides was another one. They went to the policymakers. The policymakers saw the scientific data. They acted on that. They figured out what the solutions are, and they are implementing those solutions right now. And it's proof that policymakers and scientists can work together and can solve problems, which leads us to the real discussion today, which is global warming and climate change and all of that. So, well, let's give a round of applause for the policymakers that saw the ozone problem for what it was. That's right. There we go. Is that a little bit too much? I think we got it under control now. Okay, so let's start with the natural reasons for climate change, because I'm supposed to do Climate Change 101 in what is now 12 minutes. So we'll see where this goes. There are natural reasons for climate change. Climates were changing thousands of years, millions of years before we were here, and here are some reasons for them. Some of you may have heard of the Milankovitch cycles. There's 3 basic cycles you should know about. That the Earth's orbit becomes more elliptical and more circular over a period of about 100,000 years. Now this causes climate change on 100,000-year cycles. For instance, right now we're closer to the sun on what date? Does anyone know? We're closest to the sun on January 3rd and farthest from it on July 4th, and it shows you that's not what causes the seasons, all right? So we can get into detail like that some other day, or you can ask me after the program, but we do have an elliptical orbit around the sun, and that's changing on 100,000-year cycles. Number 2, the Earth axis is currently tilted at 23.5 degrees. Wow, wait a minute, these slides look like they're coming right out of a book. Could it be a fundamental atmospheric science book? Could it be a book that just introduces you to the fundamental elements of meteorology? Yes, it is. This is nothing controversial. It's nothing that scientists fight over. This is just the facts about our atmosphere. All right, anyway, I'm going to get back to the point. It is supposed to be Climate 101, and I'm trying to portray it as that, all right? Pretty simple stuff. So anyway, getting back to the point, the Earth's axis is tilted at 23.5 degrees now. And that ranges over a period of about 40,000 years, about a degree more and a degree less. When we're more tilted, our seasons are more severe. When we're a degree less tilted, our seasons are less severe. That causes natural climate change. And finally, the big one, the Earth is like a top. Precession it's called, okay? It's wobbling like a top. In a little over 11,000 years, guess when we're going to be celebrating the summer solstice? December 21st. The seasons will have completely reversed by then. Now, it's going to take 11,000 years to get there, so don't, hold your breath on that one. However, the point is this causes natural climate change too. And if anyone were to tell you that, I don't know many reasons for natural climate change, there are plenty of them. Here, I'll show you a few more. It's not just the Milankovitch cycles. Over millions of years, we've had plate tectonics. That's changed ocean currents. It's changed the location of continents and oceans. That changes climates. We have sunspots. That's a huge 22-year cycle. 11 years after we have sunspot maximums, which cause the sun to emit about 0.10% more solar radiation. 11 years after that, we get a sunspot minimum. That causes climate change. There are natural reasons for climate change. Volcanic eruptions. Isn't that a fantastic photograph? Wow. It feels like the eruption of this organization, the California Climate Change folks, It started as a small group and it's erupted into this enormous movement. It's quite impressive. Anyway, what happens? Those big volcanoes, it was El Chichon in the early 80s in Mexico that blew up. That changed climate. It threw enough aerosols in the upper atmosphere that we cooled off by more than a degree for more than a year. Then we had Mount Pinatubo, the biggest eruption in the 1900s, and that, again, threw enough aerosols in the upper atmosphere and reflected enough solar radiation that it cooled off Earth's atmosphere by about a degree for more than a year. So there are a lot of these reasons for natural climate change, and we should know them, because those are worked into the formulas. Those are worked into the models that climatologists use when they're trying to figure out what's going to happen next and what happened in the past. For instance, about 18,000 years ago when we had our glacial maximum, our last glacial advance during the Ice Age was at its maximum. Look at where the ice was. Boy, that was a different climate. Here in Santa Monica, it felt more like Seattle during that time. Right? And that was just 18,000 years ago. I know, I have some colleagues that are that old. Right? Well, anyway, you begin to understand climate change a little bit better if you know about those natural reasons for climate change. Now let's get into what's going on in our atmosphere over the last century or so. Most of you know that the sun, being a hot body, emits more in the shortwave part of the electromagnetic spectrum, right? Hot bodies give off shorter wave radiation. That shorter radiation comes from the sun into our atmosphere. It heats up the Earth's surface and the oceans. And because, hopefully, last time I checked, we weren't at 6,000 degrees Celsius yet. So because we're a much cooler body than the sun, we emit in the long wave, the infrared part of the spectrum. And that's where it gets interesting. All right? So it looks sort of like this. Shortwave energy comes in from the sun. Our atmosphere is mainly transparent to it, mainly, as you will see. That heats the Earth's surface. The Earth's surface warms and then radiates long-wave energy out. And it is those greenhouse gases that are responsible for absorbing that long-wave radiation that they allow the shortwave in, but they're selectively absorbing the long-wave radiation. All right? Anyway, it's called the greenhouse effect, and if it wasn't for greenhouse gases, Earth's atmosphere would be about 30 degrees colder Celsius than it is now. Just about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Boy, if you think low clouds and fog are cool, check that out. So, thank you. Let's hear it for greenhouse gases, giving them a round of applause, right? Because without them, life on Earth as we know it would be impossible. And as soon as the sun set each night, we'd cool off like 30 degrees just at the snap of your finger. All right? So what are these greenhouse gases? Carbon dioxide, water vapor, a very important greenhouse gas. Methane, nitrogen oxides, there are others. But you can see this is what we call the radiation budget. As radiation from the sun comes in, you can see about 30% of it is reflected back out into space and doesn't affect us. But about 19% is absorbed in the atmosphere and the clouds. And what's the big arrow? That's the radiation that makes it to the Earth and ocean surface. And that is the radiation that's ultimately responsible in mainly heating our atmosphere. Uh-oh, now it won't. Oh, by the way, did you know that there is just kind of a side box here. There at the equator is an energy surplus. There's more energy coming in than going out. And at the poles, there's an energy deficit. There's more energy going out than coming in. The net result is you think that the equator should constantly be getting hotter and that the poles should constantly be getting colder, right? But they're not. Anyone know why? Okay, I'll tell you. It's winds that circulate excess heat and cold. That's about a third of it. Ocean currents do the same. They also circulate excess heat and cold. And then latent heat, as water is changing state in the atmosphere, it circulates that excess heat and cold. So thank you for those circulating currents. Well, look, if we now know what the mechanisms are that heat our atmosphere, remember, it's not the shortwave energy from the sun that heats the atmosphere. It's the energy from the sun that then heats the surface. And then the Earth's surface that gives off, what kind of radiation was that? Long-wave radiation. So that the Earth's atmosphere is almost primarily heated from the bottom up by long-wave radiation. There's no argument about that. That's been taught in basic atmospheric science classes for many, many decades, long before we had this discussion about global warming. This is called the greenhouse effect. This is what makes our atmosphere livable, all right? So that's the point I wanted to make. If I missed everything else in this presentation, if someone were to ask you, what is the basic science of how our atmosphere is heated, you can tell them, well, it's heated mainly from the bottom up by long-wave radiation that is absorbed by greenhouse gases. The net result is, you have to admit it, change the chemistry of the atmosphere, you're going to change the weather. There's no argument about that in the scientific community. Did I say no? I meant it in the scientific community. And this is the curve. You've seen it many times. We're not going to get into detail because I'm going to run out of time. We've been measuring the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere since the 1950s. We know how much CO2 was in the atmosphere before then. And I'll tell you about that in a second. But does anyone see a trend, by the way? You know, these are seasonal variations, by the way. Some of you probably know that since the northern hemisphere has so much land mass, currently when our trees and the colder climates are dropping their leaves and they're not carrying out photosynthesis and the photoperiod is shorter, they're not pulling in the CO2, so the CO2 content comes up a little bit seasonally. Then it'll drop again in the spring and summer. But again, you know, there's an obvious trend here, and we know what's causing this. Scientists know that about 80% of this curve is a result of burning fossil fuels that have been under the ground for millions of years and are now being burned in the last century. Another percentage, perhaps 20% or more, is due to the destruction of rainforests where we have this huge carbon dioxide sunk, right? So this gives you an idea of the measure of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. You've seen a lot of these. It's just like flipping through a book, isn't it? There's nothing really complicated about this stuff, all right? We see that the amount of carbon dioxide has fluctuated. This goes back 1,000 years. And of course, it's way up here now, higher than we've ever recorded it and higher than we know that it's ever been. Hey, let's give it a round of applause because we made it to 400 parts per million. Thank you, carbon dioxide. Way to go. Yeah. We were always looking forward to that one, weren't we? All right. There are other gases, methane, nitrogen oxides, etc. So, you know, it stands to reason if any rationally thinking person would look at the carbon dioxide content, knowing that that was one of the major drivers of our greenhouse effect, seeing that it's increased by so much just over the last 1,000 years, you would expect this curve to make sense, wouldn't you? All right. If it went in any other direction, it'd be really a big surprise. And so you see the mean up here, that's the black line, and why is it there? Well, that's because our temperatures have gone up about 1 degree Celsius in the last, 100 years or so, a little bit more Fahrenheit. And the net result is it's brought that mean temperature for the last 1,000 years up quite a bit, you see. The mean should be drawn right here. This is natural climate variability. You can see it here, all right? By the way, how do we know what was going on 1,000 years ago? Ice cores, right? And when it snows, it traps air bubbles inside those snowfalls. And we can go back hundreds of thousands of years and figure out not only what the gases in the atmosphere were, but what the temperature was. This goes back to the 1800s. You see another temperature curve that has an obvious trend. By the way, does the temperature go up every year? No, it doesn't. It drops for a year or two, then it starts on again, doesn't it? Right? So this isn't something where we go outside and we notice that every year is warmer than the one before. It's a trend that's been going on for a century or so. Now, finally, we get to this curve, and we see three different curves here. Carbon dioxide, methane, and air temperature. Does anyone see any correlation between carbon monoxide, methane, and air temperature over the last 400,000 years? You can't find the curves, can you? Because they're the same, all right? Talk about correlated. Every time we've had an increase in CO2, we've had an increase in temperatures, all right? Every time. There's no exception to that. And now this goes back to over 10 years ago, we knew this. Over 10 years ago. Now we've brought this curve out to over 800,000 years. And we can tell you that there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now, by far, than there have been for more than 800,000 years on this planet. In fact, if you look here, this is 325 parts per million. Where are we right now? We're off this chart. It's the first time that's happened in just about 1 million years, and we know that now. That's not being argued in the scientific community. We can talk about how the ice is melting, but I don't have time for that. So here's what we come down to. We come down to models. And what some scientists have been doing, well, all of the big climate scientists have been doing, is they'll run their models backwards where they know how much CO2 was in the atmosphere and they know what the temperature was then, right? And they'll try to trick the computer to see if the computer can predict what the temperature would have been then. And then, if it does, then they know that that model works best to try to predict what? The future. Because this is not controversial. We know what happened in the past. You saw that data, all right? No one's arguing about that. And so here's where the models come out. And remember, by the way, my handout, are we going to be able to get that out to everybody? Okay, I have a handout that updates you on the latest statistics. I'm almost done, by the way. I'm a little bit over, so don't worry if you're getting nervous. I'm getting there, right? Yeah, look, this goes back many years now. We knew that the models were showing this trend to be the future of Earth many years ago. Okay, this isn't something new for us. But what the new study that has come out by all the major climate scientists that are keeping up with this in the world, the latest IPCC results, are showing that this possibility of temperature changes is narrowing a little bit, right? So we're getting a little bit more specific, a little bit more knowledgeable about what we can expect in the future. And it ranges from roughly about a little over 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature, about 1.5 degrees. That's about 3 degrees Fahrenheit by the year 2100. Worst case scenario could be up around 4 degrees Celsius, which is about 8 degrees warmer. And so it's more complicated than that, as you all know. I'm supposed to do Climate 101 here. It's an impossible task in the time I have. But here's the problem. Some people will say, well, there's a lot of uncertainty here, right? And I'll say, well, this is the curve that shows if we stop burning CO2, or if we stop burning fossil fuels right now, we stop putting CO2 in the atmosphere right now, what's going to happen to temperature? Not even that one goes down. Does anyone know why, by the way? Yeah. It's going to be here for a while, that's right. So even with that, we get a little bit of warming. Of course, that's not going to happen. So when we look at these different models, they show a different amount of warming depending on if we get negative and positive feedback mechanisms that I can't talk about because I'm already over time, all right? So this new curve, by the way, looks almost like this. This is the latest that just came out. And it's just a little bit more narrow. There's a little bit less uncertainty. You know, people say, well, if there's uncertainty, then why should we act? Well, what if the uncertainty ends up here? You see? So that uncertainty question can go in either direction. And if it ends up here, of course, that's catastrophic climate change that will completely destroy ecosystems on Earth as we know them. And billions of people will die from that. There's no question about that. You can go online and get the latest IPCC report. They show you who's been warmer, who's been cooler. They show you what we expect in the future. And I want to end with this one, see, I said end. I hope that'll make our timer happy. I want to end with this one map that shows why everyone isn't going to get warmer. But what we do expect is that as climates change, and we've trapped more heat in the atmosphere, what we do know is those convection cells. Remember I talked about that, the wind that mixes excess heat and cold. Those convection cells are on steroids now. And nature is trying to figure out how to redistribute the excess heat that is being trapped by those additional greenhouse gases. And so one of these scenarios suggests that as Greenland ice sheet, and you read that, yes, it has been melting. I have the latest statistics there for you. As the Greenland ice sheet melts, that fresh water flowing over the ocean, being lighter, less dense than salt water, has the potential for blocking the Gulf Stream. If that were to happen, while most of the rest of the world were warming up, this part of the world would get much, much colder, the northwest part of Europe. And so it's these very detailed problems that scientists are trying to work out that you're going to hear about after I'm finally done. Geez, you're thinking, is he ever going to finish? It's these very detailed problems that we have the most trouble trying to figure out what really is going to happen here. So here's what we can tell you. We know we're getting warmer. We know we're going to get warmer. But that doesn't mean everybody's going to get warmer. What is happening everywhere on Earth is an increase in the climate anomalies, or the weather anomalies, where you hear it everywhere you go, and the statistics show it. The hottest ever, the coldest ever, the longest dry spell, the worst flooding. These are not coincidental. Some of them are, but put them all together and they add up to the climate change that you've seen on these charts. And so this is what scientists aren't arguing about. The uncertainty based on the details I just mentioned to you are what climate scientists are arguing about. Okay? So I hope this was impossible for me to do. You know, in front of an audience like this, the people that I respect so much, and I'm way over time now. Ladies and gentlemen, wow, another reason for me to be nervous. California State Senator Fran Pavley has focused on climate solutions throughout her career as a legislator. In 2002, she authored a bill limiting greenhouse gas emissions from new cars and light trucks, creating a model for national standards that were adopted 8 years later. In 2006, she authored the Global Warming Solutions Act, a comprehensive framework for cutting emissions across many sectors. A native of Los Angeles, Senator Pavley spent 28 years as a public school teacher. Wow, a public school teacher. In 1982, she became the first mayor of the city of Agoura Hills. She served 4 terms on the city council. She was elected to the Assembly in 2000 and to the Senate in 2008. Ladies and gentlemen, State Senator Fran Pavley.
Maybe as a former 8th grade classroom teacher whose students monitor the clock every second, I'll try to be timeful. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be back in Santa Monica. You know, the redistricting threw me a curve. Ended up losing wonderful Santa Monica and the west side, and not that I don't love my new district. There is a slight change between Santa Monica and Simi Valley and Santa Clarita. Just saying. But many of these same issues are relevant there. I want to thank Church of Ocean Park for their good work. It reminds me of the good work that the Interfaith Power and Light did in relation to California's tailpipe emission bill, the bill I authored back in 2002. There's nothing like a group of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian clerics lobbying in the halls of the Capitol to really bring home the message. Their message was the moral responsibility we have for caring for the planet and future generations. And here's a hidden secret. That car bill that passed, which was a collective effort, and I appreciate that, passed by the narrowest of margins, 41 votes, and you need 80 in the assembly. The key swing vote, I won't mention names, but his priest made a home visit 2 days before the vote, talking about how important this decision was. I hadn't realized his priest made a visit, but it was several weeks after the vote, and he said to me, how did you arrange that? You know, I had nothing to do with that. That was the power of the Interfaith Power and Light, and you can't get a better lobbying group in the halls of the Capitol and making those individual connections. So that might be a model for the future as we sort of re-energize our efforts moving forward. Let me also just thank Judy Abdo and the 3 members of the Santa Monica City Council. I always still brag about Santa Monica. There's always some competition between some city named Berkeley or one of those others in the state, but very progressive politics, especially regarding environmental sustainability, usually, you know, way out in front of the curve, but we need those models, so keep up the good work here in Santa Monica, and even though I'm just a little further north and west, I still feel like I represent this area, so thank you again. Let's go on to the first slide. I decided not to hold the clicker, so here we go. I had my staff put together a few slides just to keep me on track, because I tend to tell stories and I fill up 50 minutes at a time, because that's what I did for 28 years teaching 8th grade. But I always try to talk to people in California about the cost of doing nothing. I mean, we get so programmed in thinking about, oh, we can't do this, it'll create higher energy costs for our utility bills or our gasoline. But what is the cost of doing nothing in California? And then I start talking about the impacts directly to California. Yes, there are global impacts, but if you can make it relevant to people that you have to communicate with, it's critically important. So, of course, sea level rise. What is the cost to 1,100 miles of coastline on infrastructure or on cost of the tourist economy? How will it affect our insurance rates? That's a cost. I chair the water committee for the state of California. What are the true costs of earlier melt of the Sierra snowpack, less snow in the future, the importing of long distance of water? How can we become more regionally self-sustainable? What are the costs on sea level rise of saltwater intrusion into the delta in Northern California? How does that affect your water supply? How does that in the long term affect the cost not only to ratepayers, but our agricultural economy in the Central Valley? Also linking the costs of climate change, and Bill's a scientist, I just try to, I think my role in life is try to explain things to a broader public up in Sacramento, and that's a challenge, you know, especially with term limits, 119 other people to talk to all the time. But what are the links between climate change and warmer temperatures and health impacts? Do you know places like Fresno, 1 out of every 5 children carry an inhaler because they're asthmatic. They've had real problems of higher evening temperatures, problems with health impacts, especially to the elderly. It's going to get worse in what we call our urban heat islands as well as the Central Valley. There's a lot of relation to climate change, health impacts, and we need to talk about that collectively. because I can talk about greenhouse gas emissions, but I find it when I talk in a broader context, not to you people, in a broader context, really bringing home what it means personally to our state and your community is incredibly important. So this slide was just sharing with you some of those costs. Let's move on to the next slide. I thought I'd start off this presentation with some good news. Because sometimes I'm sure all of you like me get very frustrated with the federal government level and perhaps some of the things we do on the state level. I recognize that. But what are some of the good news things? Well, in California, most of our greenhouse gas emissions come from mobile sources, right? The transportation sector. We're sort of unique. Other states, it could be more stationary sources. California's mobile sources. So we're zeroed in on focusing on that as our #1 objective. So what's been happening lately? Well, the National Fuel Economy Standards, the one that President Obama passed courtesy of a Supreme Court decision that allowed the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate greenhouse gas emissions, they now, nationally, cars will eventually get an average of 45 miles per hour fuel efficiency standard, and it was based on California's tailpipe emission bill. We can't regulate fuel efficiency, but we can regulate, courtesy of that Supreme Court decision, greenhouse gas emissions from the tailpipes of automobiles. Give yourself a round of applause, because many of you in this room worked on that. Paul, Scott, right, and others. Now, just this month, the second 2 bullets up there, in Sacramento, Mary Nichols with the Air Resources Board announced that California is working with 7 other states to really incentivize and roll out 3.3 million alternative fuel vehicles that rely on battery power. So we're talking about plug-in cars, plug-in hybrids, as well as all electric cars. The coalition will be with Oregon and Washington, plus a handful of states, 5 states in the Northeast. That is 45% of all cars sold in the country. And one thing they're going to do and work on together is really providing links into infrastructure, whether it's the charging stations and other things. But the governors are all on board, and I think tomorrow you'll hear Governor Brown talk about additional things a group of states are working on together. Because just like climate change, when we can get to the tipping point of over half the states, or at least percentage-wise, 50% plus 1 of the states wanting fuel-efficient vehicles or energy efficiency, we can start creating those dynamics, not only in the marketplace, but politically, pressure on Washington. So we're going back to that formula. The third bullet down, this is a bill the governor just signed. It was AB 8, and I carried the companion measure SB 11. It'll put up to $2 billion over the next 10 years in incentives, not only to the Carl Moyer program, you might not know what that is, but it's money going to, frankly, clean up the air. It's spent wisely, usually by our local air resources boards. It's had a tremendous impact, whether it's in the Central Valley of reducing diesel tractor emissions and truck emissions from the ports, but it also has a lot of money for those incentives and rebates to encourage people to purchase alternative fuel vehicles. That is one of the selling points out there. This continuing package will roll out over the next 10 years. And the reason why this is exciting, the automobile manufacturers see the commitment California's making, and they're matching that commitment. 12 years ago, they were suing us. Today, they love us, and even Ford and GM officials, president of GM, has told me, we can't keep up with demand. That's a good thing, right? So whatever your issues are, we have to figure out how to channel the marketplace to get that consumer demand or reach different messengers on this. So those are the good news. Down here is good news too. 33% of all the energy in California is going to come from clean, renewable sources. Alternative wind, solar, geothermal, and on. That is now a floor, not a ceiling. We are committed to raising that to 40 to 50% over the next several years. And here's the amazing thing about this. A year ago when this bill was on the floor of the state Senate, how times have changed. We had probably a half a dozen Republicans supporting that bill. They get it. They supported the AB8 funding bill, continuing existing fees on cars, voting for it. Why? They see the benefits, and the people in the Capitol that are advocating for these bills are like, oh, all the manufacturers, the major automobile companies, the car dealers. I mean, it's a broader coalition these days. And all these legislators regarding the solar and wind, they're mostly in rural Republican areas. They're creating jobs right there. They're strong advocates for these programs. That needs to catch on around the country. The next bullet, some of you had involvement with Prop 39, which passed last year on the ballot, provides $2 billion to schools and community colleges. You get some bill at Santa Monica Community College, about $550 million a year for the next 5 years will go to schools, K-12, as well as community colleges, mostly to reduce energy consumption. Modernizing heating and air conditioning or lighting are the primary uses, but there's other things as well. If schools have already invested in all that, because probably Santa Monica schools have, you can go on and use it for solar and everything. That money's rolling out the door this year and next year for the next 4 years. Every dime you save in schools on energy bills, you can use it for the classroom, right? That's the real benefit. And then lastly, down here, TV efficiency standards. Our Energy Commission, who does an amazing job, is rolling out really, it'll be the most stringent and energy efficient TV standards for those new, bigger televisions that are so popular these days. Let's go on to the next one. More good news. We're finding out that in California, and you've seen the models, our energy consumption, despite our increase of population, has stayed flat. It's the lowest per capita in the nation. We enjoy competing with Texas, do we not, on so many levels? They're paying more than 2 times as much as we are per kilowatt hour for on their energy bills that we are, because we're smarter. We know how to save energy and not waste energy. We have found out it is less expensive to invest in energy efficiency than to build a new power plant. We reverse the incentives, so even the utility companies get it. Let's go on. California is attracting lion's share of clean tech dollars. We get about 50 to 60% of all the clean tech investment capital in the United States comes to California. Why? We put a cap on emissions and created a marketplace for alternative fuels and renewable energy. We're seeing the benefits in LA, which is becoming really quite a clean tech corridor and R&D place. I'm seeing it in my brand new district in Chatsworth. They've got Capstone Turbine, who's selling energy efficient turbines to countries all over the world. Solar City is out there. Boulder Electric is producing vehicles. They've actually moved from Boulder, Colorado, because they like our policies better in California, yes. And over 310,000 new clean energy jobs to boot. What about the military? Here's a surprising story. You know, you find your political partners in interesting areas, interfaith counsel and life. How about the military? Do you know they have met and exceeded all of AB 32's standards? Of course, they have an advantage. They can just order it done, and it's done. They don't have the pesky political system to deal with. But if I go out to the Navy bases in Ventura County, which is part of my district, they have LEED silver or platinum buildings now out there. They're using biofuels made there on site with partnerships from the private sector. They reuse, they're almost fully sustainable. They reuse all their food waste and other kinds of waste. They get it. Several reasons. They tell me directly. These are the top military officials and supported by the Department of Defense. They say too many people are dying along the supply lines in Afghanistan. That's a waste of human life, and they go over the statistics, and they consider climate change one of their greatest military threats in the long term. Drought-plagued nations with massive population shifts into unstable areas of the world They understand that, and so they are committed to not only California standards, which are a good first step, but even greater level. Now, they don't talk about it too much on the federal level because they also have a benefit of all the energy they're saving, even with sequestration. They can still maintain their operating costs at their military bases by being smarter on the way they use energy. So I've actually been spending time with the military on climate change issues, and I wanted to share that with you. Okay, next. Local governments, I mentioned Santa Monica. I'm not going to go through all these, but these are just a sample of some of the things local governments are doing. And kudos to the city of Los Angeles, starting January 1st, banning plastic bags. Yay. That's a small thing, but a meaningful thing, and you should tell people the connection to being plastics and oil consumption, let alone the litter and everything. But all these things are things that your communities are doing with their farmers markets and putting it into the schools as far as better lunch standards. Building standards, we still have a challenge, frankly, on making sure multi-dwelling units benefit from energy efficiency. I know it's something Santa Monica cares about. It's difficult when you don't own the building to invest in all that. And also using net metering and feed-in tariffs in order to create the right incentives for energy efficiency. So let's move on. A brief overview of what is AB 32. It's amazing in Sacramento. I told you the Clean Car Law passed in 2002. There's 4 of us left in the legislature that were around when that passed. We have term limits. So we have constant sort of rediscussions and education on all these issues, and then we went through a recession. AB 32 passed in 2006. I think there's 5 people left in the assembly that were around in 2006 because they stayed there for 6 years and are out. So that, again, the turnover. So what is AB 32? It's a multi-sector approach using mobile and stationary source strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions back to 1990 levels by 2020. It's being implemented primarily by the Air Resources Board, but working collaboratively with the Energy Commission and the Public Utilities Commission and local governments. Where do our greenhouse gas emissions come from? And this is just a brief overview of it. See the transportation sector? That's why we're so focused on that. It's so critical. Industrial, yes, like refineries and paper processing and food waste plants and other things. Building and energy use is the next biggest contributor, and other things. But let's look at what we call the scoping plan over here. This is 2008, and it's been updated and continues to be updated. So how do we match that, where the greenhouse gases come from, to what we need to do? Well, over on the far side, the clean car standards that we passed in 2002, that are national standards, that's a big hunk. But also next to it, what else in the transportation sector? We have LCFS. Do you see that? If there's one thing I'd like to share with you today that I need your help in, that's the low carbon fuel standard. Fancy acronym. What is it? It's a requirement that all oil refineries reduce the carbon intensity of their fuels by 10% minimally, using a full life cycle analysis. So you get penalized from importing it in and things like that. The oil companies, I believe, next year politically are going to do everything in their power to prevent that from going into effect. And if that doesn't happen, we lose a huge part of the reductions envisioned in AB 32. They are investing, as you know, heavily in oil recovery. They're not investing enough in biofuels and alternative fuels. We've got to keep that signal to the marketplace because we are seeing the investment in cleaner alternative fuels to use in our transportation vehicles, not just keeping up the same approach we are. So we know they can do it. They are going to put every pressure they can to change that or delay it next year, so stay tuned. That's critical. Smart growth strategies. Santa Monica is a model, obviously, in smart growth strategy with their mixed use and use of transportation dollars effectively. Energy efficiency, that's appliances, refrigerators, buildings, etc. Renewable energy is 19% of reductions. We're on track and exceeding our expectations when AB 32 passed, so that's good news. Cap and trade, that's a small segment of it. What is that? Yes, there's still a cap on emissions, right? AB 32 put a cap and rolls back to 1990 levels. And if any businesses exceed what the required reductions are, because we want to incentivize that, they can sell those to someone else who is not able to meet their reduction requirements. Overall, it's still, you meet the reductions envisioned in AB 32, but it allows sort of the marketplace to take off. It's somewhat complicated. It can work, requires to make sure that emissions reductions are enforceable and permanent and can be verified, and our Air Resources Board is committed to getting that right. And that last two pieces of the puzzle up there are looking at short-term but very important greenhouse gas emissions reductions, and that's relating to black carbon and methane and some of those that are critically important. Okay, let's go on to the next one. I mentioned the oil company attacks. They want to not have to purchase allowances under AB 32. We're auctioning off allowances, so the major emitters will have to, essentially it's a form of a carbon tax, but it requires them to purchase allowances over what they emit, so they're incentivized to reduce their emissions. They would like to get rid of that. There's lawsuits that we've defended several times over that say that, AB 32 and auctions are really not a fee, they're a tax. And what does that mean? You would need a 2/3 vote of the legislature. I don't think we have a 2/3 vote of the legislature. So we're very cognizant of that any expenditure of revenues from AB 32 has to be spent for its intended purpose of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That means cleaner cars, more fuel-efficient cars, energy-efficient buildings, etc. Let's go on to the next. So a few things you can do, but with this group, you're self-starters, and you can think of a lot of things yourself. Obviously, keep Sacramento, hold our feet to the fire, and we work with other states. I'll tell you, I spend a lot of time working with other states, because it's all about how we affect the national government. Connect to your community. I haven't checked out this website, but please do so. One of my staff members thought it would be excellent. And the third bullet that's not filled in is one I just call personal responsibility. I think it's all important, very important for all of us to be models in our personal behavior of working together to be more self-sustainable. And with that, I will stop what I am talking about. I want to thank you very much for allowing me a chance to give you a statewide perspective and overview.
So I would like to introduce our final speaker. It's Mr. Jonathan Parfrey. I first met Jonathan when Sustainable Works joined LARC. LARC is the Los Angeles Regional Collaborative for Climate Action and Sustainability. Jonathan is a board member of LARC. Jonathan has a really impressive bio, and so I won't go through the whole thing because I want to actually give him time to speak. Jonathan is the executive director of Climate Resolve, and Climate Resolve's mission is to make Southern California more livable and prosperous for today and for the future by inspiring people at home, work, and in the government to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and prepare for climate adaptation. From 2008 to 2013, Jonathan served as a commissioner at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. He currently serves on many boards in addition to LARC. He's on the Los Angeles League of Conservation Voters, Ciclavia, Move LA, and the Alliance of Regional Collaboratives for Climate Adaptation. From 2007 to 2011, Jonathan serves as the director of the Green LA Coalition and Physicians for Social Responsibility. In 2003, Jonathan was appointed to Governor Schwarzenegger's environmental policy team. And in 2010, Jonathan received a Stanton Fellowship, and in 2011, he was a senior fellow at the USC Marshall School of Business. And there's a lot more that he's done, but I'm going to bring to the stage Mr. Jonathan Parfum.
Good morning. I notice there's some folks standing in the back, and there are seats available if you want to come on up. Hello. And you're welcome to come on in if you want. There's seats available. So I'm hoping I'm going to share some new information with you, stuff that you may not know. So let me start at the very beginning with what makes LA kind of exceptional when it comes to climate change. I'm going to throw a few ideas out at you. Maybe you didn't know this. By the way, Senator Fran Pavley is an Angelino, and she was being very coy about her accomplishments. AB 32, which she had championed, she pushed that across the finish line. That was her bill, has changed the planet on how we're approaching climate change. And we just had her in our midst. Unequivocally, she is a climate hero. Another Angelino, and there was a slide of her in Fran's slideshow of Mary Nichols. Mary Nichols is the person who is leading California's implementation of AB 32 at the Air Board. It is the precursor of not only the United States, but many other nations' actions on climate change. So just to let you know that's amazing. We have an office here in Los Angeles of the Bloomberg and Clinton Climate Initiative, C40. They're right here in LA. They have an office. They brought people from around the country to be in Los Angeles as one of its key offices. R20, which is, Laura's here, is Mr. Schwarzenegger, helped get that launched to implement climate actions regionally in different parts of the world. They have an office here. The Climate Action Reserve is where there is the carbon offsets are being coordinated in the United States out of Los Angeles. The Waxman-Markey legislation in Congress, Henry Waxman, an Angelino. Out of UCLA and the Jet Propulsion Lab, two of the most key centers for climate science. Dr. Alex Hall, I'll be talking about his studies in a little while. Dr. Hall is the lead author of the IPCC chapter on regional climate change, the actual looking at cities and how climate affects cities. And did you know this? The most efficient solar cell that we know of in the known universe is produced in the city of Los Angeles by Boeing in the San Fernando Valley, and then that is the solar cell that's used on the space launches. And we have the most photographed solar panels in the world on top of the Staples Center. When the Goodyear blimp goes by and they say, you know, Kobe Bryant's getting ready for the game, they're looking at that is the most photographed solar panels in the world right here in LA. The most persuasive a movie on climate change was made in Los Angeles, Inconvenient Truth, in Culver City. And here's the most important thing. LA is kind of the analog for the developing world. We're not the New York where it's incredibly dense with skyscrapers and everyone's jammed in together in this concrete area. Instead, what we have is density together with sprawl. When my friends in City Hall go out and they go to the rest of the world, everyone says, so, yeah, we know about New York. Yeah, Chicago's interesting. Yeah, London's okay. What's going on in LA? They really want to know, because what happens in LA will be influential in these other new capitals across the world. As the world is urbanizing, LA becomes the model. So what we do here is incredibly important. Well, I hope you feel like now you have influence, because what you do at this organization in on the West Side can be very influential. Look at our city. I mean, is that the great picture postcard that you see, you know, of you can surf in the morning and you can ski in the afternoon? What a beautiful city. And that's the thing I want to bring home, is people are talking about climate change internationally. And I think it's important to talk about our own tuchus. Let's talk about what this means to us specifically. Our Mediterranean climate, our cool summers, our warm winters make LA one of the most desirable places to live on Earth. And it's our climate. And that's the number one reason why people come to this amazing place, to experience our climate, our beautiful land of Southern California. I had to put the Dodgers, I'm sorry. I'm in mourning myself. But this area is so beautiful, and Angelino Heights, the new hottest neighborhood in Los Angeles, just to let you know. And Ciclavia, I'm one of the founders of Ciclavia, so I love Ciclavia. And I think it has transformed our city to some extent. But the last great train station built in the United States. We live in this beautiful area, and we are the envy of the world. And I don't want to talk about whether climate change is true or not. Instead, let's look at climate change from the perspective of our home. Just our home, protecting our home. And what does it mean to really rise up to be, forgive the word, a patriot, to be a climate hawk, to defend ourselves? How are we going to defend ourselves from climate change? Now, there have been studies done on climate change and popular opinion. They're being done out of George Mason and out of Yale. There's wonderful people working on this. And the PPIC, Public Policy Institute of California, has also done some great polling. Essentially, let me give you the thumbnail sketch. About a third of the country are good liberals like us. The Sierra Club says it, they believe it, the end, done. About a third of the country. They care about the environment, and they're on our side. We could go out, and if we really work hard to work our base, we can get a third of the country to totally support what we're doing. That's good. We can't forget them. They're our choir. Occasionally we have to, sing out of the hymnal to our choir. It's a good thing. Then there's about 20% who are the exact opposite. The Sierra Club says it, I don't believe it. They're the climate denialists, and they are out there. And then there's about 10% of the public that's just completely checked out. Sorry, they're just not plugged in at all. And then there's that 30 to 40% in the middle, the rest of them. They're worried about the paycheck. They're worried about their job. They're worried about their kids getting a good education. They're worried about getting their kids to school and getting home and making ends meet and getting dinner on the table. They are not thinking about climate change. Those are the people we need. How do we talk to that middle 30%? Now, when we're looking at climate change right now, and a lot of people go here, and they just talk about the consensus of all the different climate societies. And I love the way that Bill presented the climate science. Thank you, that was wonderful. And and I love the fact that he showed a textbook. He just opened up a textbook and he just, took the photos out of the textbook, because that's what it is. There is no controversy about this. Do you know that there's greater controversy among scientists about whether smoking gives you cancer than about whether climate change is human related? So, let's talk about the downscales though. Let's talk about LA. And this is the work that Professor Alex Hall out of UCLA has performed. Now, in the past, you've probably heard studies that give guesstimates about what the future temperatures will be. But let me talk a little bit about his methodology. His methodology, this is a typical global climate model. Look at how indistinct things are. That the cells where they look at the climate impacts are 100 to 200 kilometers across. At 200 kilometers across, that puts Santa Monica in the same cell as Lancaster. There's a slightly different climate between Santa Monica and Lancaster. Not only a physical climate, but a political climate, if I may opine. So then, what the topology of our area. We know that when we're in Santa Monica sometimes, and then we have to drive to the valley, there could be like a 20-degree difference, right? So we already know this, and what do the climate scientists say about these microclimates within Southern California? And so Dr. Hall downscaled 25 climate studies, global climate models. He downscaled these global climate models that had been trued, as Bill pointed out, by looking at how the past climate is. And what they looked at is then the ensemble mean across all of these different studies. And so looking at this, what we were able to do in our organization is to help Dr. Hall get this information out to the public. And what are the big takeaways? That in the mid-century epoch, between 2041 and 2060, this is looking again at the ensemble mean over 25 global climate models. We're looking at about 3 times the number of extreme heat days. And in the valleys, about 4 times the number, and in the mountains and the deserts, around 5.5 times. Now, for an extreme heat day, that's 95 degrees. So we're looking at a very different experience of temperature in Southern California. As you heard from Senator Pavley, this affects public health, this affects air quality, food supply, energy demand, very important, and even energy supply too. Water evaporation, when it's warmer, there's more evaporation. It affects vegetation, the plants become drier. It can affect habitat that depends on those plants and the water supply for those plants. Wildfires, I'll get into that in a minute, are anticipated to increase because of this added heat. And there are the indirect effects, such as property values, such as the interior of the United States is going to be even warmer than the Southern California effects. So there could be people moving to Southern California to be in a more temperate climate. It affects the roads and the rails. And just looking at the air quality question, that added heat converts the nitrogen dioxide into ozone. And it does so in a way that the NOx becomes the ozone and can affect our health. So we're looking at the urban heat island effect, and this is on top of the other effects. So on the urban heat island effect, we are looking at somewhere between 3 to about 23 degrees Fahrenheit, where the urban heat island effect adds to the temperature inside a building. This is inside a building. It can be even more outside a building. And so in Los Angeles, if you think of the land mass of the city, about 40% of our land mass is asphalt. Streets, playgrounds, parking lots. And then about 20% of our land mass are rooftops. And so you heard from Bill about the solar radiation coming down. We have we have changed Southern California's vegetation to such a degree that, and soil, that we actually are absorbing now 60%. Our land mass is 60% of that solar radiation that would have in other ways been diffused. So there are ways of dealing with this. And I will be getting into what we can do specifically about that in the near future. Now, related to rain and snow in Los Angeles, I want to provide some context for you, and this is really important. You just can't talk about precipitation and just stop right there, because when it comes to precipitation, we really rely on what we import into Southern California. So the city of Los Angeles imports 89% of our water. There's kind of a joke in the water world where if there's a drop of rain in the western United States, somehow it makes its way into Los Angeles. But if there's a drop of rain in Los Angeles, we put it out into a sewer and send it out into the ocean as quickly as possible. So this is the Cascades, built by William Mulholland 100 years ago. We're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Los Angeles Aqueduct. And if you have you ever wondered why LA has this kind of like crazy shape of it goes down to the port and then there are all these like little neighborhoods attached to it out in the valley? It's because all of those independent cities opted to become part of the city of LA to take advantage of this water in the LA Aqueduct back, about 100 years ago. And if it were not for William Mulholland's engineering feat, there would be no great city of Los Angeles. It would still be a very small city. The city could only support around 400,000 people, where today we support around 4 million. And so here's the California Aqueduct as it comes into Southern California. And here is the Colorado Aqueduct. And so here's the intake up in the Owens Valley. This is where the water first comes into the LA Aqueduct. It's an absolutely beautiful area. DWP hired a company, Tetra Tech, to perform a study. And their study looked at future water supply for the city. And they were predicting that there would be about a 5% decrease in the available water by mid-century and 10% by the end of century from the traditional sources that feed the LA Aqueduct. That's a lot. That's a lot. The California Department of Water Resources, looking at the California Aqueduct, are predicting somewhere between a 2 to 7% decrease in water available for the California Aqueduct and 7 to 9% by the end of the century. And when it comes to this is the California snowpack, you can see there's the historical average on the left, and then looking forward where there are predictions of a tremendous decrease in snowpack. Now, and then again, the projected snow water equivalent for the Rocky Mountains, where we do get some of our water, it comes in through the Colorado River. As you can see, increasingly, the precipitation that will happen will come down as rain rather than as snowpack. And why is this important? Because that means that earlier in the year, we're going to see much higher runoffs. So we currently have an infrastructure that's geared to a certain climate, where the Sierra Nevadas are sort of a reservoir that holds the snow. About 20% of our water supply is held in the Sierra Nevadas, and now we're going to see that reservoir change dramatically. And so we could see very high runoffs earlier in the year where we simply don't have the infrastructure to capture that volume of water. So, and this will of course have implications even on energy generation, because right now we're able to use some of the hydro power at certain times of the year, and now that's going to be shifting. So, running out of time here. Talking about wildfire, traditionally in October is when we have the onset of the Santa Ana winds, and the Santa Ana wind conditions are caused by having a cold air mass over the Great Basin Desert that then drains out with a high pressure system over the Great Basin towards the ocean, and as it comes through mountain passes, it increases in speed and in intensity. And we do have these fires that are driven by Santa Ana winds. But what the climate scientists and what Dr. Hall is predicting is that we are now going to see the Santa Ana conditions change. There's actually going to be fewer Santa Ana winds in the future. And that our fire regime, because of the high temperatures, are actually going to change substantially. We are going to see more wildfires in the summer, like the station fire of a few years ago, will become more of the norm rather than the Santa Ana driven fires. And that will have to change the way that we manage things. When it comes to sea level rise, there are some interesting initial studies related to this that will be released shortly by our friends at USC. And we are looking at 10-year storms having significant potential damage. Even today, a 10-year storm in areas such as Venice and Wilmington. And there are some really important questions because we have 43% of America's import-exports are going out through the port of Los Angeles and the port of Long Beach, that the nation's supply chain depends on these, the nation's economy depends on these ports being able to operate well. And if there's any impact to port operations, that could be stunning for the US economy. So, I'm sorry I breezed through this because I want to get to the good news. I actually want to let you know that there's stuff we can do. So, love Al Gore. Love him. What a great hero. He really put this issue out in front, and he's done so many great things on the subject of climate change. However, there are really important studies that have been out there that show that some of the language that Mr. Gore and Mr. McKibben have been using really speaks to the third of us, gets to us. It doesn't get to that middle 30 to 40% that we need to persuade. And so rather than talking about polar bears, we have to talk about people in our own cities. And our theory of change, we have a theory of change in our organization, which is that if we make climate change relevant to people where they live, they will then persuade their policymakers to take action. Rather than argue the science globally, which is where it's been stuck now for a dozen years, instead we should talk about how we need to adapt, and how we not only need to adapt, we need to limit the damage. How do we go upstream to actually limit the damage? So our view is that we can actually make our city a better place in trying to adapt and limit the damage of climate change. We can get multiple benefits from one thing. So here are some of our campaigns, and I'd like to tell you about them. The first one is that right now, as I described, our rooftops in Los Angeles, that's 20% of the city's landmass. It adds, again, somewhere between 3 to like 23 degrees Fahrenheit to the temperatures inside of a home. By a simple passive technology, by having a more reflective rooftop, what you can do is cool down those homes. You're adapting, you're becoming more climate resilient in your own home, and at the same time, you're reducing the load on your refrigeration and on your air conditioning. You get 2 for 1. You're reducing your energy use. You get the benefit on having more money in your pocket that you're not paying out to your electric utility, and you're burning less fossil fuel to create the electricity. So, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power already has an incentive. Are some of the folks here not Santa Monica, but City of LA, some Venice? Yeah. So right now, when your house has to have a new roof, you can get an incentive that will take care of all incremental costs from a regular roof to becoming a cool roof. I'm sorry? There are many different methods of doing it, and some are longer lasting than simply paint. And so we are working to, and this is what our organization is going to do, we're going to mandate that any new rooftop built in Los Angeles is going to have to be a cool roof for a residential. Yeah. And because there's an incentive, I think the Building Industry Association that usually likes to go up and shoot down these types of things are going to support us. So I think we're going to be able to do this, but I'm going to need your help to go before LA City Council and to do this. We also have public health studies coming out that are going to really hit home on the virtues of these cool roofs. But you're in Santa Monica. So in Santa Monica and the rest of the state, we need to expand this incentive program. So I'm going to need your help when we go before the California Public Utilities Commission to be able to get the same incentive outside of the city of LA. And then when we have that, when we move the ordinance mandating these new rooftops, there's not going to be political opposition. We want to get this stuff off the ground. And I can talk a little bit more about this later if you want that. Now, number two, 40% of the landmass is asphalt. We have to do something about that. So there is a new coalition we helped start it called Streets for the Future. No major city in the United States is actually planning on embedding highly reflective material into the asphalt slurry. LA is going to be the first to do this. Now, right now there is a measure that is being put before the people of Los Angeles in being prepared for November of 2014, and it's called the Streets Bond Measure. And the idea is to fix potholes. That's what they want to do. Like, I don't like potholes, right? I ride a bike most of the time, but so I don't like potholes on a bicycle. It's kind of dangerous. But rather than get our streets back to the way they were in 1950, why don't we get streets to where they need to be in the year 2050? And so that's what we're trying to do. And we have a broad coalition. So it's not just cool streets. We have Lawrence Berkeley Labs working with the Bureau of Street Services. They're testing these materials right now. We want to make sure that these are really safe streets in addition, that doesn't make the streets slicker, and that when you recycle the material where they tear up the asphalt and they lay it back down, there are no problems with this added material. So we're going through a bunch of tests right now. But this is a campaign that will be on the ballot to fix our streets, and not only do it for cool streets, but complete streets, so it's more walkable and bicycle friendly, and green streets, so that when it rains, you're capturing that rainwater and you're able to use that. So that's very, very important, and I'm gonna need your help coming up. The next one, this is big, and Senator Pavley mentioned this as well. Prop 39 is big. It's really big. It's $2.5 billion of money coming to schools in the state of California. But you know what they don't have? They don't have as an action to make them climate resilient. They say that they're going to make them more energy efficient. That's a good thing. Don't get me wrong. But what we need to do, and it was just last Friday that they said they're not taking comments anymore. Guess what? If you write them today or tomorrow, they're going to accept your comments. I am asking you to send that to docket@energy.ca.gov and mention the docket number. And I would like for you to please tell them that you would like to see them add climate resiliency as one of the benefits. Because we have to stop spending money, our taxpayer money, on stuff that is not going to help us deal with climate change, right? It has to be integrated so we do the things at the same time. So what we're trying to do is build cool roofs so that we protect our students. And as I told you about playgrounds, did you know that in August, when the kids go back to school at LAUSD in the San Fernando Valley, those playgrounds are 150 degrees. They can't play on those playgrounds. The asphalt's sticking to their tennis shoes. It's not a good thing. So our idea is to convert those playgrounds. So I'm going to show you some images in a little while of what that looks like. Now, here's another. This is a no regret strategy that we believe you can enact right away. Not only take on the urban heat island effect, which will cool down LA in a way that our temperatures in the future will even be lower than they are today. That is a smart thing to do. But in addition to that is to have more local water projects. Because pumping water up over the Tehachapi Mountains into Southern California, did you know that's the world's largest water lift? That one pumping station is 2% of all the electricity used in the state of California. When you go over the Grapevine, how do you think that beautiful lake got there, that Pyramid Lake? We pumped that up from the California Aqueduct over the mountain and down back into Southern California. So the more we can save water locally, the better. Reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And because of that, we need your help. When we come up to talk about recycled water, Santa Monica's in the lead on this, but we need your help in LA. on conservation, on cleaning up our aquifers, and there will be ballot measures that I'm going to talk about in a little while related to this. And this is part of our recycled water system in Southern California. From the Hyperion, right now, your sewage from the city of Santa Monica ties into the LA City sewage system. It goes out to the Hyperion water treatment facility. Every single day at Hyperion, next to LAX, you've driven past it, it smells a little funky. There's 350 million gallons of water goes out into Santa Monica Bay every day. This is the water that came in from the Wind River range of Wyoming down through the Green River into the Colorado River and then into Southern California, and we use it to flush the toilet and out it goes. From 900 miles away? Is this the right way to treat this? What we instead we need to do is to recycle this water, and there are ways of doing that. So there are some very exciting opportunities to do that. Right now in LA, as I said, 89% of our water comes from imported sources. We need to increase that local amount, and they have projected for 2035 to get to 37% local water in the city of LA. And to tell you the truth, to get there is going to require bond measures and people willing to pay for it. So, this has to do with the grid. One of the other no-regret scenarios, and I'm going to breeze over this very quickly, you need electricity so that people who are most vulnerable have some air conditioning during heat waves. It's going to get hotter. Here in Santa Monica, you kind of don't need to worry about that. I live in downtown LA. I know how hot it gets, so I just want to let you know that we need to have a robust grid. If you have a really strong grid, then you can add more solar to it. But right now, our grid was built in the 1950s. We need to modernize it and have these microgrids. Microgrids, if you ever saw that picture after Hurricane Sandy of Manhattan and the whole place is dark except for one little light, that was NYU. They had a microgrid. They were off the grid. They can interact with the regular grid. That's what we need in Southern California to become more climate resilient. Need your help on public education. We need to reach more and more people to tell them about what they can do. Thank you. We need that. There's new studies that are coming out that give these opportunities for news blasts. There's a community-wide greenhouse gas inventory that's coming out of Los Angeles County. Juan Matute is one of the leaders in doing that. USC is coming out with a study on sea level rise and exactly where in Venice you have to worry and where in Venice you don't have to worry. They will tell you that's coming. On coastal fog, if you don't like June gloom, well, you're in trouble. And then soil moisture and stream flow, incredibly important when it comes to water supply, and our water supply from the Sierra Nevada. Dr. Hall is going to do a very comprehensive downscale study of the Sierra Nevada. When it comes to transportation, this is something that we have to walk the talk, as Senator Pavley said, taking our bike, walking more. This is like, I didn't want to say son or daughter of Measure R, so I called it the scion of Measure R. Thought I'd use a fancy word. But we're looking at a potential ballot measure that former Santa Monica Mayor Denny Zane is helping to pull together for November 2016. We're hoping that goes through. A very important thing for social justice in Los Angeles is to make sure that when we have new stations across Southern California, that we're not displacing historic communities that live there. There is a way of having transit-oriented development that respects the neighborhoods by having more inclusionary housing in those areas. I'm sure Pam O'Connor could talk about 2 hours on this subject very easily. This is her thing. The local water investment, we are actually looking at also a new measure for local water in Southern California. We're working with RAND Corporation on a NOAA grant to really characterize what the water investment would look like here. There is a chance for a new ballot measure to do more local water supply in LA County and to clean up the water that goes into our oceans. You get it like a 2-for-1 multiple benefit deal. I know that Governor Brown wants to put a state water bond before voters. I don't know if that's going to happen. There is efforts to lower the requirement from 2/3 to have new revenue to 55% at the local level. And that's something that Assembly Member Bob Blumenfield, before he moved over to, now he's over at City Council, but when he was in the state, he put that ballot measure as a constitutional change. That's coming up. That there is tar sands oil that is being refined here in Southern California. I'm part of a statewide effort to address that. That still is, there's a lot of internal work on that. And as Senator Pavley pointed out, the oil companies are gunning for the low carbon fuel standard. We have to fight to preserve that. So what does all this look like? What does this look like? And I just want to point this out really quickly that, look, so here is the LA River today. Now, what does climate change materially look like if we do it right locally? That's not bad, right? That's meeting the challenge of climate change. All right, the LA River, look at what it can be. So rather than this eyesore, it becomes a place where you can use the local water, and rather than it just rushing out into the ocean, it could actually be of use. So I told you about these playgrounds. This is what is going on, but that's what it can become. This is meeting the challenge of climate change. This is what it looks like. Or an alley. Instead, it can become with permeable pavement so that you're able to capture the water. And so here's just a regular old home with turf grass. The Department of Water and Power is paying you $2 per square foot to tear up that grass and put in a drought-resistant lawn. Right now, you can get paid to do that. Oh, this is about a block away from where I live. There's like Figueroa Boulevard at LA Live. It's a big street, absorbing all that solar radiation and keeping it at the surface. And look at what it can become with a streetcar. Hey, I like the streetcar. The LA Times can go to hell. It's a wonderful project. And with trees, imagine if this was Figueroa Boulevard. What a grand boulevard that would be. And then this is further down towards USC, what it could look like. Or in Boyle Heights, right? This is just, again, all of this asphalt pavement that's out there. And instead, you can convert it to something. This is what it means to meet the climate challenge in Southern California. And then my friend Andy Lipkiss from Tree People, this is his project. I want to be really clear. Some of these slides are from Tree People, and we work very closely with them. But look at that pavement right now. What a mess that is, right? That's out in the valley. And look, they decided to tear up the asphalt. They put down ways of infiltrating and capturing the rainwater, and that's what it looks like now. This is what it means to meet the climate crisis. So I just want to thank you, and I really want to work with your organization on solutions.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I love seeing slides of the future that we could have, so we could all envision a different world, a better world that we can create together. And we're going to bring up Jonathan again, along with Bill, to do a Q&A, because I'm sure while they were speaking, a lot of questions popped into your head. So while we set them up,
See, since the major part of the CO2 emissions in the U.S. and also in China, which is a big emitter, is due to burning fossil fuels for electrical power generation, what strategies could be adopted to push the economy, enough solar voltaic and solar thermal to the point where economy of scale makes it competitive economically with fossil fuels?
yeah, it has to be a green light. Yeah.
Okay, I see it. Earlier this week, US EPA announced that there had been, between the year 2010 and 2012, a 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. I'm going to repeat that. In 2 years, there had been a 10% reduction in greenhouse gases from power plants. This is due in some measure to renewables, but in a much larger measure to natural gas displacing coal. Now, my view is that in California, we need to push as hard as hell, as Fran pointed out, that Senator Pavley, she was talking about how we're going to 33% renewables by the year 2020. What we need to push for is to get to 51% by the year 2030. That should be our new mantra and our new goal, 51 by 30. And if we do that, we are going to have a tremendous new investment opportunity in California for even increasing the amount of renewables. Here in, in Los Angeles, the Department of Water and Power had relied heavily on coal. The department is now committed, thanks to a lot of great activism by Sierra Club. Jim Stewart, where are you? This man can take credit for a great deal of that excellent work that was done. And so there is a commitment to converting off of coal to go towards energy efficiency, to renewables, and as a last resort, there are times that those need to be filled by some natural gas. But again, the goal is to increase the amount of renewables. Right now, renewables are more expensive. But as Senator Pavley pointed out, and this is something we have to keep in mind all the time, what's the cost of not converting to renewables? And we need to keep that cost-benefit analysis. If we don't affect this conversion away from fossil fuel for energy generation as quickly as possible, it is expensive, and guess what? It's tough too. It's not easy. But I think we're up to that fight, and we have to make that happen.
Can I follow up on that real quick? You talked about roofs. 20% of Los Angeles is roofs.
That's right. Yeah.
That sounds like a hell of a lot of solar panels.
Yeah.
Instead of going out in the desert, for instance, and destroying the desert and building solar arrays there where we have to transport electricity into the city and lose 30% of it, why aren't we putting the solar panels on the roofs? And by the way, I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit. I don't think it's, as a homeowner, I don't think it would be painful for me to put solar panels on my roof when I know in 10 to 15 years I'm going to have all of that money back by the savings and energy and get free energy after that. What do you think of that?
So, I'm not an expert in the physics of the energy grid.
Oh, by the way, is Paul Scott still here?
He just walked.
I saw him earlier,
leave.
and I was thinking about him when you asked the question.
But one of the problems that I hear from the engineers within the utilities is the difficulty of integrating all of the distributed generation into the grid. And that's why I was pushing for the concept of a microgrid and modernizing our grid. Because right now in Hawaii, they have maxed out on photovoltaics going into their grid. They can't take any more. They're done on Oahu. They can't do any more. And that's because they have an antiquated grid. And here in California, a lot of the utility guys are saying, we need to have our distribution stations and our receiving stations converted so that we can do energy storage at these sites so we could balance out the grid. That is more expensive though. And I'm just saying that for us to do it, I don't want to minimize that there aren't some costs. So for example, snapshot of today, to put PV on a roof is somewhere in the range, if you have a really big roof and a great deal, you can maybe get it for 14 or 15 cents per kilowatt hour. It goes up to about 28 cents per kilowatt hour. To generate wind in the hills above the Tehachapi's is at around 8 cents per kilowatt hour. Snapshot of today, the amount we're paying in the city of LA to bring in Palo Verde nuke energy, I'm not in favor of it, I'm just telling you the price, is 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So There are some additional costs associated with renewable generation, but it's an important, necessary cost. I just want to say that so that when we go and argue with people that don't want renewables, we don't sound naive. And the price is coming down considerably on the solar, but will it come down to the cost of traditional coal and natural gas fire plants from a rooftop? Maybe not, but from a large-scale solar facility, it'll be competitive within the next few years.
I have a Santa Monica question based on Jonathan's comments about activism in Los Angeles. Fran Pavley was very gracious in acknowledging Santa Monica's role in pioneering sustainability policy. How can we in Santa Monica become a net exporter of climate change action? We have things to offer. Santa Monica has a sustainable city plan. We have divested from all of our fossil fuel stocks in our portfolio. We passed a sustainability rights ordinance. And when I talk to my colleagues on city councils in other cities, they say, sure, you can do that. You're Santa Monica. You have these people here as your constituents. I think like Bill's diagram of the infrared heating the greenhouse gases, we have to turn up the heat from below. We have to get the grassroots on fire about this to move the political decision makers. How can we do that?
I love that metaphor. Well, let me throw a new thing out for you, which I think is a new concept and one that is exportable from Santa Monica to other cities. If Santa Monica is climate ready, that becomes something that one can actually sell as an economic virtue. That no matter what hits us, we're ready. We can deal with it. Our supply chain, good. Our water supply, we're good. Electricity, we're good. When it comes to sea level rise and big storms, we're ready. If Santa Monica still has some work to do on this, but if Santa Monica on the adaptation side of the ledger works on these matters and becomes a climate resilient city and shows that there are economic benefits, because then you can have companies moving into Santa Monica that says, no matter what, we know the electricity is going to be running. No matter what, you have a microgrid, we know that we're going to be good. We're never going to have any downtime. I think you can start selling being climate ready as a virtue, and it makes a strong economic argument that would work in Texas or Louisiana.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is the problem with politics today, as you guys know more than anyone, is that our thought process is so short-sighted. It may be cheaper to do something in the short run. Those cheap light bulbs were an example. But in the long run, it costs you more money. And so how can we get people back to that fundamental way of thinking about life is what really makes you happy in the long run, is thinking in the long run, planning in the long run, making a better future. And that's really what we're talking about here, and I think what you guys have been trying to do in the city council as well, that a lot of other folks don't get.
Also, Santa Monica is part of networks that go out across the world. So the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, Santa Monica has been one of the leaders. What happens in Santa Monica, it's not like Las Vegas, it actually just doesn't stay in Santa Monica. You guys are seen as the leaders throughout the globe, and your influence is felt. Now, but is it felt in Fort Worth? Maybe not. But the concept of becoming climate ready and resilient as a challenge to other cities, that, in my view, is what you can activate even more conservative constituencies out across America that could excite them, and then they would have to follow suit. Because then it becomes a competition for capital. And I think that if Santa Monica could show that it is a competitor in that regard, it could really stir things up.
Good afternoon. My name is Parker Jean. I'm a proud student of Professor Selby. So this one would be directed at Jonathan, although if you would like to comment on it too, Professor, even though I waste up too many of your office hours anyway. But so first of all, and I wish Fran Pavley was still here because I really would like to have her state legislator opinion. The first comment would be SB4, now that this ongoing debate about fracking, it almost seems counterintuitive because, you know, we have this big time limit in terms of climate change. And something like SB4 really, it sends kind of a message that, yeah, it's still okay, you know, as opposed to the moratorium. So if you could really just comment on that in terms of the long-term perspective, and one more solution that I feel would be decent in the short term would be an oil severance tax, considering that California is the only state that doesn't have an oil severance, or, you know, large producing oil state that doesn't have an oil severance tax.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was a question there. Again, I have to be very clear. Our theory of change is making climate impacts relevant for people's lives. That's where I'm starting. There are some excellent groups working on the fracking question. I encourage you to be in touch with them. But we are laser focused on talking about how people's lives are being impacted by climate effects and how they can protect themselves. So I'm looking at that middle 30 to 40% and how to make them care about this issue right now. I don't know if fracking moves the middle 30 to 40%, candidly. I don't know.
Yeah, just to comment on that too, you all understand that these new technologies have really changed the economic game here. Because when we used to study this 4 or 5 years ago, we could show that this was going to be an economic cliff for this country. We were going to go over that cliff if we didn't change to renewables as quickly as possible. But now with this new technology, and the price of oil is high enough now that it supports it, we do have a lot more opportunities to get fossil fuels that we never did before, and we're going to burn those fossil fuels. China's going to burn them. India's going to burn them. So it makes it, I think, even more important to talk about those externalities that you're trying to say, is that this is going to cost us more in the long run if we don't do something right now.
That's exactly right. In my view, we have to make the case that we have to leave that stuff in the ground. We have not made that case. We haven't made the case. And so we're fighting on a solution where we haven't brought the rest of the American public along on the context of why it's so essential to fight it.
Hi, my name's Ryan Duncans. I'm gonna stand up. I am a student of Selby's as well, and I also went to this preschool that's right next door to here a long time ago. Well, not that long ago, I guess, but it seems like a long time ago to me. Oh, sorry. I went to this preschool right here, that's what I was saying, and I graduated on this stage. And so it's cool to see that this place has transformed into this. And like kind of brought me full circle. But I just want to speak on soil. So I've heard a lot about water conservation and the cool streets and stuff like that, and trying to eliminate or lessen the effects of the concrete and the heating of cities and stuff like that. So I just want to ask, how practical is it to start enforcing like city composting and gardening in local parks? And I know there's like community gardens and stuff like that, but how do we make it more open to the public and more like continuous thing that's actually like feeding the public and feeding farmers markets and stuff like that? And that's to you, John.
Thank you, Ryan. You know, I went to Samuel High myself, so I'm a local. Yeah. Probably many years before most of you, but yeah. I love composting, and I love the food recycling and the harvesting of sewage and turning it into biomethane, and that's already happening. We're doing a lot of that already in Los Angeles. We can do more of that. And the reality, though, is that those are not, my key issues, and I think those are great issues. But when it comes to climate change, we're really focusing on how to help people survive. Now, food security is a huge issue, and when we look at so let's say something happens to the levees in the California Delta, and we lose over 70% of the water that comes into Southern California through the California aqueduct. Our food coming from the Central Valley would be in great jeopardy right at that point. And then how do we feed the 10 million people of Los Angeles County? Now, that's an important question. And that kind of resiliency is something that we need to look at. And one of the reasons why one of our climate sort of no regrets strategies is to do more water recycling and to do more conservation. The fact that we have these grass lawns that are kind of like reminiscent of Versailles, so yes, we all have our little Versailles in front of our house, that day really has to end. We have to recognize that we are in a Mediterranean climate. We are not in another kind of a rainier, more verdant climate. We have to live within our means. And we should be able to save water from outdoor use, which is about 40% of all the water that's in Southern California is for outdoor use. We have to find ways to use that much more conservatively. And so I think that, for me, the food security question is incredibly important when it comes to climate resiliency, and we have to somehow find ways of using less water for things that simply aren't needed.
Okay. I'm going to bring up Catherine King and Chris Gutierrez to give some final comments.
Can I just make,
Oh,
I just
Bill would like
want to
to
say one
respond.
more thing. I left a handout for everyone that summarizes the latest climate science, and I hope that helps a little bit. It covers some of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about today. And in regards to the last couple of questions, just, we can't do everything. We are all wasteful in so many ways. I am too. And do what you can. The little things here and there all of those things collectively are going to make a huge difference. And and that includes all of us. Thank you.